future doesn't have to be like that. If you step on in to the secret kindergarten, showing you that your young children hold the key to understanding the universe, understanding the self, and therefore they hold the key to human freedom. Your child is the gatekeeper. Only you can open the gate, and the secret kindergarten is going to show you how.
Welcome to the secret kindergarten, Grown Ups edition. And I'm your host, Gino, as in G. No. And my special guest today is my friend, Danny Beggs, from the Undiscovered Country Podcast. Danny, how's it going? Thanks for jumping on today.
Yeah, it's going well, Gino. I appreciate you having me on. Yeah.
Likewise, I love meeting and talking to people, so it's great. And, well, let's get into it. I always try to sort of link things into to childhood, and based on my background as a teacher, at least for a few years anyway, and I just put some questions to provoke talking about childhood and stuff to my guests. And so how is sort of what we learn in childhood so important for our future and our future development? Something like that anyway.
Well, how it's important is, there are critical years, in childhood. 6 to 8, I believe, is when, the brain is really forming these critical structures. And in those years, you're soaking up experiences that are going to form the foundation for how you perceive and filter reality, like the information that you get from living. So, if you got traumatic stuff happening in those years, you could have a, pretty good of your teenage years, rest of your life, and that beginning is really going to color your entire life. And I mean, there's pretty much any way you cut it, you have to be doing what people call shadow work, and kind of continually bring your conscious mind back to some of those experiences, and just keep them in your awareness so that they're not kind of bubbling under the surface, affecting you very strongly. I mean, they're going to affect you in any way, but if you just kind of ignore everything that happened, then you're going to be unconsciously reacting to the world based on, those experiences. So, the less aware you are, the more control these experiences have over you.
That is super awesome explanation. You make me look good. That's so cool. And I do as you're explaining that, it makes me think of like, okay, there's trauma, right? And then, so in a way, the idea would be to sort of reduce trauma, because our experiences, I mean, so much of life is traumatic. So in a way, there's no real avoiding it. Where, as being a human, that sort of what you're saying is a shadow work later in life. That work's always going to be there. So in a way, like if we reduce that trauma, what do you think about that shadow work? Do you think like that'd be easier, or just the work would stay the same and we just become better as humanity?
I mean, I think having a childhood with minimal trauma definitely makes that work easier. It doesn't, I don't think it, negates the necessity for, remembering what happened in your life and making sure that it's not, affecting you strongly. But yeah, obviously if you don't, have terrible experiences that are like hooked into your psyche, then you don't have to do that much work to like be free, psychologically speaking, at least.
Yeah, and then it's like maybe like we shift into a different gear, or the brakes are off a little bit, and we can do better.
Yeah. There's less baggage kind of holding you back. Although I guess there's like a flip side to that where, you know, some people who go through really intense trauma, you know, the work of having to overcome that, of like being forced to overcome it, or else, you know, it'll ruin your life. Like that work makes some people stronger than the people who kind of have like soft, peaceful lives, but it's, you know, they didn't have really anything to struggle against. So, you know, yeah, maybe they're not being controlled by some of these trauma responses, but at the same time, there's lots of other things that influence the psyche, that influence how we respond to the world. So I guess it's not just trauma that's, you know, pushing you in certain directions and kind of and just influencing how you make decisions instead of your own soul or self.
Right, I get what you're saying, and this is something that I've really explored doing my own sort of reflecting back, and I've actually done a lot of, especially before I figured out about sort of what's going on in the world, and learning about morality and natural law. Before that, I did a lot of, you know, exploration in sort of my past and, you know, psychotherapy and stuff like that, and I did come across sort of what you're saying, and I've sort of always ruminated on that, where like, you know, having a sort of more sort of protected life, or a sort of more softly controlled, like psychologically controlled life, I've always thought that, you know, that brings out, in a way, it's like a deeper, not really trauma, but like a stronger binding, because it's so subtle. I guess what I'm trying to say is I've read books like, I think Richard Dawkins in some of his atheist books would always would fall back. I can't remember which book it was, but he'd fall back on people that were sexually abused in the Catholic Church. He'd fall back on this as like an atheist argument, but saying how they would find that, you know, once they had overcome their sexual abuse, in a way they kind of felt, dare I say, like thankful for that, because it made them realize how bad Catholicism or how bad religion actually is. That the actual physical abuse that they went through wasn't really such a big deal. They felt more traumatized about how terrible the whole system of the religion itself was. And that kind of, okay, pretty heavy example, but I think that kind of highlights, that made me think a lot, being like, I wasn't abused at all like that, and but I was raised Catholic, and it's just, it's something that I think, and then this sort of, we hear about this sort of, you know, pro-pedophile movement. I'm not sure we're going to be able to publish this video now that I'm saying all these words, but this sort of pro, you know, that movement.
Yeah.
The main argument I've heard for people that say that is that, like, that you know, that kind of trauma makes a stronger person, makes a better person. But a better person, I mean, like, you know, it's something that's relatively easily overcome, which I think that's a marker of, like, that type of trauma is absolutely deplorable. But then also, you know, all these other kind of mistreatments that take all this work to overcome later in life are deplorable too. So it doesn't mean that kind of abuse should be made okay because some psychological
100%.
abuse is worse.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely a manipulative line of reasoning. Yeah, definitely. I guess what we're kind of talking about is like, I guess you can always see some kind of positive in any sort of messed up situation, but I for sure wouldn't say that that's, that kind of trauma and abuse is easily overcome. That's probably the most difficult to overcome. I would say so. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the most well, it's like for the individual, it's like the most confronting, right? Because the subtle traumas, you take your lifetime sort of exploring and figuring out and trying to go
and even seeing them.
Yes.
Which is a lot of the, like, when you do grow up in, with a soft environment, full of love, you're still picking up bad habits that are negatively affecting your life, but it's much harder to see them because it's like, okay, I eat too much sugar. That's not that bad until you get to your 40s and now you're having to cut off your feet. And it's like, now it's a bad problem, but I didn't really see it as a problem until then. But yeah, with major, confronting absolute evil when you're that young, you're like immediately forced to be an adult, and like you're forced to look at reality in a cold way, where that then allows you to obviously see the issue and to begin remedying it maybe earlier. I mean, some people probably just break and aren't able to fix it because it's such a monumental task to go about that.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, some people don't make it.
Sure. Yeah. Probably most.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So just to link to just quickly to my show is that I try to just focus on simple things like just empowering and advocating for young children and just being encouraging, right? Because if you were to be raised in a household that was kind of restrictive or not encouraging, that's a sort of setting you up for serfdom and just sort of not really becoming who you were supposed to become. And some people might never ever become aware of it. They just sort of mope their way through life, and that's where I sort of, I'm motivated to try and sort of break that down a little bit.
That's good. Yeah.
But yeah. Do you have a childhood story or an experience that you'd be willing to share?
I guess not really anything connecting with that kind of trauma we were just talking about. I actually super lucked out. In my view, I got a great upbringing. My parents were intelligent and loving, and they were able to provide for us. But I would kind of put the emphasis, at least for this discussion, on my dad, who's actually a mental health therapist, like a mental health professional. And so he's always been aware of like how trauma affects the brain, how the brain even like kind of develops. He's aware of the kind of the balance between the left and right hemisphere. He tried to, obviously he tried to provide for us. He didn't want to make our lives hard, but he also knew the value of hard work. So he would make us, do stuff, make us work, so we weren't just given everything. So yeah, I'm definitely thankful for that. One of the stories that I guess kind of illustrates that sort of intelligence and the benefits is, going, when we would go on vacation, we would usually go over to San Diego, California, and it's about a 6-hour drive from Phoenix, from where we lived. And most of it is a drive through the desert. So, I mean, it's hot and you're not looking at anything. So, back then we would just want to be on our little video games, just to, pass the time. But he was aware of how that kind of stuff affects your brain. And, he knew it wasn't good to be glued to a screen for hours at a time. So he would make us, the first 3 hours of the trip, he would say, just sit there. You can talk or stare out the window, but just, no video games until halfway, knowing that that's going to train your nervous system to be okay with boredom, to be okay with just kind of sitting there and relaxing and not stimulating your mind with anything. And it caused so many fights. It's insane. Obviously, because at the time we thought it was so stupid. We weren't really understanding the effects that might have. But of course, now that decades later, I've seen how the world has developed into, a population full of addicted people. And I mean, even today, like, I am addicted to my technology, but I can see it and I can kind of mediate that process. I do still have a lot of work to do of, exercising that will, but yeah, I can at least be aware of how these little stimuluses and hits of dopamine are affecting my brain, affecting, my circadian rhythm, affecting, just my thought patterns. Like, when I wake up in the morning, I can tell I want to look at my phone, but a lot of the times I tell myself, no, don't. Just kind of sit there, get out of bed slowly, which is another thing that he talked about, the importance of sleep. Get your sleep and then wake up slowly and just kind of sit in the peaceful, that peaceful silence of refreshed body from a good night's sleep. And that's been helpful as well.
It's good to recognize those things when you're older, right? Like, I used to hate my mum for not letting me watch TV. I mean, I did watch TV, right? But it just wasn't, when it suited me all the time.
Right. All the time.
And, I'm grateful for that now. And I see this unschooling movement where, parents, and it's rich coming from me. I'm not a parent, but I see how hard it is. It takes the patience of a saint to endure and set up these boundaries for children, right?
Yeah.
And it is for the greater good, and it's like trying to temper this reality, this social media tech world, trying to temper that with just being comfortable in your own skin, and say, like the car drive, just enjoying the car drive and seeing the world outside and enjoying the present moment and being with others.
Or even just being okay with not enjoying it. Just suffer and be fine with being, this is hours of just nothing. that's good for you. You should be bored sometimes. Stare at the wall.
Yes, right. Endurance and fortitude and those kind of things, right?
Yeah.
The tedious aspects of life, because getting out there and achieving your goals and doing the things that you want to do and making a life for yourself, it's tedious work.
Yeah. Slow.
Yeah. Super awesome. Well, very enlightening, and I appreciate everything that you shared. It's super, super cool points that you made. And I would just ask if you had any books that you would like to recommend to anybody watching this.
Yeah. One of my favorite books is The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. I brought these. Looks like that. It's a good book about the psychological struggle of creation, and the war against the parts of your mind that are trying to that are just addicted to comfort and niceness and easiness, and the parts of you that are essentially trying to kill you, and you just have to fight it to evolve. So that's a good one. This is kind of a weird book. It's called The Vision Quest. Personal journey through magic and shamanism.
Whoa.
Yeah. It's a cool book. It kind of goes into this guy just details a bunch of his experiences with like trance meditation and what he calls active imagination, which is a really interesting. It's kind of a form of self-hypnosis, but also it's like a meditative style where you're just letting your imagination show you what it wants to show you, and there's incredibly powerful messages hidden in the deep recesses of the mind, and there's some pretty effective techniques for plunging those depths. So definitely recommend those two.
Very, very cool. Would you say that space, those deep recesses of the mind, is like sort of what one would call intuition, using your intuition?
Yeah, I would say so. I think a lot of imagination is kind of just the the visual expressions of that intuitive force that is that's the kind of the ground of being that's always bubbling with meaning, with stuff that most of the time when we're focused on screens and whatever's going on in the world, you just kind of miss it because it's pretty quiet. But if you just learn to quiet the mind and pause and just sink into that, then it becomes very powerful and overt. Yeah.
And that's what gets me up out of bed in the morning, and it's what motivates me to do everything that I do, especially the work for the young children, because they're definitely tapped into that place and here to teach us a lot of lessons.
Yeah, they're little fountains of imagination.
That's so cool. Danny, thank you so much for sharing, and I'm putting those books on my list, that's for sure. I have not read them, and I can't wait to read them.
Do it.
And I absolutely will be subscribing to your podcast. So would you like to just share your, where people can find your work?
Yeah. So the podcast is called The Undiscovered Country. And I have an Odyssey channel, a Spotify, I have a YouTube as well, but yeah, you can find it at that address, at that name, and yeah, again, my name's Danny. So,
Danny Beggs, thank you so much, and I'll put all the links below. And thanks for taking the time today.
I appreciate it, Gino. This is my first interview, so it was a good experience.
Well, I've only done a couple, but every time feels like the first one, but you helped keep this one moving along. So
Awesome.
Thanks for putting up with me.
Awesome. Thanks for putting up with me.
Take care, and we'll hope to catch up soon.
Okay, Gino.